So thank you everyone for joining us for this sixth edition of the Support Local Art Talks. This initiative was established during COVID by the Saskia Fernando Gallery in an effort to engage with our local and international arts communities. We're excited in this talk to be reverting to our initial format, where we highlight the roles within our local art ecosystem. In this conversation, we hope to discuss the role of patron and gain a deeper understanding of how this role developed over time. We also hope to discuss the role of patron in general in relation to Sri Lanka and the world within an understanding of this day and age. I am honored to have with us today two dear friends and two very important patrons to the Sri Lankan art community. Thank you, Leena and Peter, for joining us from London and Sydney, respectively. Leena Hirdaramani is a collector and trustee of the George Keyt Foundation, cultural ambassador of the Asia Society India, founding patron of the MMCA, and governor of the Symphony Orchestra in Sri Lanka. She is co-founder of the Mount Castle Gallery, founded in 1998. And Leena is an avid collector of both Sri Lankan and Indian modern and contemporary art. Peter Harris is a collector and the custodian of the Dutch colonial mansion Doornberg Galle. He was formerly president within the Hong Kong-based Lane Crawford Joyce Group, leading a commercial and creative team in the area of multi-brand and single-brand businesses. The majority of Peter's career has been spent working as an executive in the fashion industry based out of Hong Kong and Shanghai, working across the markets of Greater China and Southeast Asia. Peter's a collector of Sri Lankan, Australian, and Southeast Asian art. So we will begin this conversation on the Patron with a 30-minute discussion, followed by a Q&A. So for those of you joining us today, please feel free to share your questions as they come to mind during the conversation in the chat box. And towards the end of the 30 minutes, we will be selecting as many questions as we can and asking our speakers to answer them. For those of you who are not able to join us throughout the conversation or would like to share it with others, we will be recording this conversation and sharing it via our website channel at a later date, hopefully over the next few days. So to begin with you, Leena, could you please tell us, prior to Mount Castle Gallery, what was your involvement with the arts and what influenced your interest in the arts?
Sure. Thank you, Saskia, for having me here. Real pleasure. So my interest in art started way before I went to college, where I did history of art, and then I did some conservation studies. But it was my mother, really. She'd bring home all these abstract works, along with her old tanjors and pichwais, and she would just put them up, and I was introduced to a lot of Indian contemporary art and tried to make sense of it. And she was so comfortable just looking at them. And so I saw the beauty in just some strokes and abstracts, and, they all have become quite famous today. So I think that was my first intro, and I got actually quite confident, and I would actually go to galleries known to her and say, I'd like to buy this gift for my mother, and they give it to me. And, I just, just appreciating art just came so naturally, and buying art and supporting art, is just something that comes easiest to me, actually. So that was my earliest introduction, I would say, to contemporary art.
And Leena, you spoke about how you were also led into conservation studies at a late date after your arts began following the Indian art scene.
Yes. And actually that, I did a course after I graduated. I went to Florence, Palazzo Spinelli, and then I came to Sri Lanka, and I actually did some courses with the ICOMOS program at PGIER, and I met Chandragupta Tenora and Jagat Veerasinghe. They were my lecturers, and that was a great time, actually, because they were really, this was early 90s, and they were using their art as a real platform to get the social issues out there. As you know, there was so much going on in Sri Lanka, there still is, but they really used it to build communities, and really used it for social change. So for me, the two of them, for Sri Lankan contemporary art, were my absolute first introductions to it, and I really felt they were leaders in this field, and they inspired so many more artists to just come out there and, voice themselves, express themselves, use this as a platform for imagery, expression, for anything really. So the two of them.
Absolutely. And Peter, your journey began in Australia and then later in Asia, more in the design industry. And I think what's really interesting is how both of you were discussing this role that you both play as patrons in Sri Lanka, but these journeys began in completely different countries. Can you tell us a little bit more how your journey towards the art scene began, and also a little bit intertwined how this role that you play as a mentor began also, because you shared how your initial experience in teaching was something that influenced you quite a bit later on in your role in the design work that you continued with.
Yes, I will speak on those things. Thanks, Saskia, for the invitation to be part of this program. Yes, I had the chance in my early 20s to live in both London and Florence. In fact, I lived in Florence for 3 years. And I think when you live, and I'm sure Leena will attest to that, living in a city like that is extremely inspiring. Even if you enter the city with a very limited knowledge of its artistic provenance, you soon very quickly become caught up in the kind of story about the story of Italian art. So I think living in London and certainly living in Italy were sort of major major touch points for me in terms of my interest in art. As you mentioned in your earlier words, I actually began my career in education. And that was, gave me the opportunity to understand the importance of encouragement, mentorship, the whole process of co-creating with students, building or expanding their limits. So I guess there's a whole lot of things came together when I finally sort of began a career in the fashion industry, which began in Europe, and then with the majority spent in Asia. I think that gave me the opportunity to really work as a mentor, to understand the sort of value of the individual, the importance of creativity. Yes.
And when did you begin collecting, Peter?
I guess that was really a consequence of the time that I have spent living in Hong Kong and China. So I lived in Shanghai, during the late 90s, and it was clearly a very big moment of change in China. The art scene was emerging, the contemporary art scene was emerging. There was a big focus on galleries, it was a kind of the first movement of contemporary Chinese artists. So that was a very arresting time to be in the city or to be in the country, and it was really through the proximity of beginning to know a couple of gallery owners that sort of brought me into that world, that eventually, I guess motivated me to sort of purchase the first pieces.
And Leena, when did you begin collecting work in Sri Lanka specifically? You spoke about how you had the confidence at quite an early stage to go to Indian galleries and ask them for pieces, which can sometimes be quite an intimidating thing to do at a young age. But when did you find yourself engaging more with the Sri Lankan after you moved here and followed the courses you were telling us about?
So I actually have lived much longer in Sri Lanka than India. So, I'm talking about when I would literally, like, when as a teenager, I would, kind of be with my mom in a journey of, buying art and enjoying it. But I think I started buying art when, when I got an invitation to an art exhibition, and there were not many around, I'd just go. I'd just show up, and that was the best way. And I still think that's the best way to see what's out there, to go out and see, and you don't know what you like unless you see it. And if something kind of speaks to you and you want it, then and you feel it's okay, then you take it home. You want to live with it. But I think for me, of course, when Gallery Mount Castle, opened, and there were so many artists, it was buzzing with artists. There weren't that many galleries around. And they just needed, some needed the first show, they needed a break, some who wanted to do it, more shows, but they just didn't have that many places to go to. So, of course, the temptation to buy something at the end of every show. So that really did help. And I must say, I met Mr. Saskia Fernando, who's a close friend, and he's really also helped me a lot, with art and appreciating art and, telling you, there's something on, why don't you go see this, I was in my early 20s, and he said, do this, do that, something out there. And yeah, so I think that's how it started. That's how it really started. I look at myself just still today as just like a regular buyer and a lover of art. I mean, whether I buy it or not, I just appreciate any type of art, craft. Something that's just made by a soul, really. I don't look at myself as a collector as such. And of course, that's happened over time. But I just enjoy my art and live with it and love it.
I think
very simply, really.
That's something that's really lovely about both of you is you don't, neither one of you I have realized likes to label themselves as a collector or a patron, but you're both very much both collector and patron. And I think what's so interesting is that it's not about aspiring to be a collector or a patron. It's just wanting to follow this, to be involved in this true, very organic development of this interest in the arts. Peter, you began collecting Sri Lankan art before you moved to Sri Lanka, and you began visiting Sri Lanka quite some time ago. Can you tell us a little bit about how your engagement and collecting began?
Yes, Saskia. The first piece of Sri Lankan art I bought was I first went to Sri Lanka in 2004, and the first piece of art I bought was not long after that. Was a piece by Saskia Pintalon, right? And I had no idea who Saskia Pintalon was. I had never bought anything from Sri Lanka before, but it was one of those pieces on craft paper, one of the black faces. And I just remember walking into the gallery and with really not probably a lot of intention of buying, but walking out thinking I had to have that piece. And I think art has this incredible ability to create this sort of immediate sort of relationship. And we buy a lot. I mean, we can buy a lot of things in our lives, but I think for me, there's nothing more satisfying than something that speaks to me. I think perhaps Leena used that expression. I had been influenced by the diaries of Donald Friend that were here at my mother's house, that were published by the National Library of Australia, and those diaries detailed in 4 volumes his life. One of those volumes was his 5 years spent at Brief. So I was quite fascinated with the Sri Lankan art scene from that particular period. And there were some Donald Friends in our house, so they were quite tangible. And around me. But it really wasn't until I bought that first piece from Saskia Fernando that, and took it home, took it back to Hong Kong and completely sort of fell in love with it, that I felt like I had to return. And I think once you actually dive in, then the journey certainly continues.
And to expand upon that a little, Peter, because your journeys are so different, but also there's a very similar role that you both play. Just to expand upon that, I think particularly during your renovation of Doornberg Galle, which is more recent, and this time specifically saw your collection grow, but also a wonderful juxtaposition of artists from other parts of the world. Can you talk a little bit about this more recent moment in engaging as a collector?
Yes, I mean, I think that I think when I started renovating the house, I really wanted to live modern in an old house, and I saw art as being the facilitation of that. And in fact, it was quite in the first 6 months of doing that renovation, as I planned which art I would put into certain places. In my main entrance, which is quite a large space, I actually had I commissioned 3 pieces by an Australian artist. As the renovation continued, and I was more and more conscious of the fact that I was living in Sri Lanka, and that it just seemed improbable that I should hang an Australian artist in my entrance hall. I decided to commission the piece from Hirdaramani, the very large piece. And the minute that piece went up in the house, or it was finished over a period of 6 months, the minute that piece was hung, then the narrative for the rest of the house seemed to fall into place. So I completely sort of rethought the juxtaposition of how pieces should sit and work together. I'm personally enjoying that sort of a Sri Lankan piece or a sculpture sitting next to a piece from China. I think it creates a really interesting context.
And Leena, you also have a collection of artists. Would you say that's predominantly across Indian and Sri Lankan modern contemporary?
Yes, it's mainly modern, and I do have some. I have Pichwaris and Tanjores also in my collection. So for me, really, I don't have a thesis, a formal on what I collect. I collect really something that speaks to me. And if it moves you and you love it and you want to take it home, very simply. And that's what I would tell people, don't overthink. Sometimes I don't get into the artist stories also. I kind of find my own story in the work. I have seen something completely different sometimes. I'm standing next to the artist and they're like, oh, this is wonderful. I'm like, no, but this is what it's supposed to be. I'm like, never mind. I like it and I love it and I want to live with it. So for me, it's really been also a fun journey, but also very conscious of the fact that we need to support living artists. We need to even support living craftsmen. And, not just this obsession to buy everything antique, because I really feel worldwide, they're struggling. The craftsmen can't get the next generation to work. So I think we also have to have that. I have that. I really feel that, we need to continue this legacy and this tradition, such beautiful traditions, especially in our part of the world, and so intricate and so sophisticated, really. I feel we need to kind of feel responsible, have that responsibility to collect also in such a manner. And then there's some paintings, it's like what Peter was saying, like, with the Saskia one, like, if you know, the hashtag, right? I mean, there are paintings to people come to my house and like, oh, well, what is this? I'm like, well, it's fine, and yeah, exactly. What do we don't see something in it, and that's fine. But it's good. And you're discussing my art, which is great. That's what I want. So I think it's mainly Sri Lankan. I do have Bangladeshi, Indian, and African. But I do focus a lot on the Sri Lankan because that's where we really live. And, I feel Sri Lankan contemporary art really is just something, I gravitate towards.
And Leena, I would definitely agree with you. And it's certainly a line in the sand for me. If you start to overthink a piece, it's not for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, if you start turning over.
Yes, I'm very quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very helpful for me because my husband doesn't get involved. So it's like, he likes it by, which really helps because I see a lot of people struggle. One likes it, one doesn't like it. My kids, no one gets involved. I do remember he did buy one painting, the only painting he bought on his own, and I was like, I really don't like it. I can't. He was very kind. He was very kind about it. Actually, you're right. At least do whatever you want with it. Anyway. Yeah, so that helps, Peter. It really does.
We've discussed this role of collector, which I think is so important as an element of the role you play as patron. For Leena, we've spoken about how this began at quite an early stage for you and developed as you moved to Sri Lanka and became very quickly involved with the artists such as Jagat and Pelu. But more recently, your roles in the George Keyt Foundation, as a cultural ambassador of the Asia Society India, which is a very important organization regionally, and then as founding patron of the MMCA. Clearly, this is a move towards the role of patron within the art space in Sri Lanka. Can you talk more about your objectives in these more recent positions that you play within these institutions?
Yes, because I think it was approach for all of this because I think they see your passion and your commitment. So, I mean, even if it's not a very formal role, I'd like to think that I could make a small difference in either way. I mean, I was at a luncheon yesterday at a foundation here, and because you're just trying to work with different foundations to do workshops, residencies, because I think that's the only way we can, especially for Sri Lankan artists, to get out there, to get more savvy, to understand all aspects of art, the business of art and how one has to kind of even acknowledge galleries and the, formalities with that. And I think I would like to put my focus on this. And also, I think it's very important, like what you did with Kana, bring in international people. The presence has to come. They need to see Sri Lankan art. I always tell people, you walk into a Sri Lankan contemporary art show, there's something for everyone. I don't see that with a lot of countries because I think I was talking to someone else actually from a very prominent foundation, and he said something just a few days ago to me. He said, in India, there's so much out there. So sometimes, you go get contemporary art, but you're still collecting textiles, you're collecting traditional art, you're collecting so much. But in Sri Lanka, the contemporary artists, in fact, are fortunate in that sense that there's not that much out there. And, if you want to start buying art, this is a great time. And there's so much contemporary art. And there's not a lot of stuff to confuse you or kind of, buy little bits everywhere. I really feel that when he said this, he was absolutely right.
So do those roles really give you a position where you feel you can play a bigger part in the change that is clearly happening in Sri Lanka?
Yes.
Is that the main objective, would you say, based on these observations?
Yes. And I think more than anything, I think we all have to take the word, we have to kind of spread the word. And I really think it does help, that connect. You tell someone you need to come to Sri Lanka, come for the show. We are planning some events. We're hoping to get people down. I mean, I talk to people about the aesthetic in Sri Lanka before I speak about the beaches or anything. I always say, come to Sri Lanka for the aesthetic, for the design, especially, everyone now is very interested in architecture, design, art, right? To some extent. So that's what I actually say. Come for the aesthetic, which I genuinely and truly believe, live, breathe, and experience it. I think Peter would agree with that also. And for me, I'm like, come for that, and then they'll be sold. I think we just need so much more of this, just, to go out there and speak about it. And I think that could be our roles.
Absolutely.
Yes.
First, it's as a starting point.
And Peter, now Leena has spoken about craft and about design. And I think what's so interesting about your work when you were working in the fashion industry is these amazing collaborations that you've done with design and craft. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those projects, and then lead us into the relationships that you now have, where you're clearly fostering young artists, working with craft industries locally, bringing in the most inspiring people from around the world and introducing them to Sri Lankan culture? Can you tell us something more about the journey pre-coming to Sri Lanka and this role that you play here today?
Yes, I would say, just segueing on from a couple of comments that Leena made. I mean, one of the things that makes me very, very happy, and I feel like I've succeeded, is when I have guests staying, friends or guests staying, and they leave Sri Lanka with a piece of art. And,
Yes.
so it means that they've bothered to look at the paintings in my house. They've bothered to read some of the books in the library, or, that have passed on, that are, sitting on tables, or they've bothered to sort of explore, the underbelly of the art scene in Colombo, which is not easy to kind of navigate, right? You've sort of got to give people pointers because it's not all obvious, right? And so, and it's such a joy when I'm having dinner with someone in Sydney tomorrow night. They are very big collectors, trustees of the New South Wales Art Gallery, and they have just hung their first piece from Sri Lanka in their home. And I think that's really exciting. It's really, really exciting. I agree with Leena's point that, it's those small victories as communicators, which I certainly see myself, as being. I was very lucky, Saskia, to work for a company for many years that believed that creativity was an essential part of the commercial process. So, it wasn't just something that individuals, we kind of dabbled in. It was something that could bring us commercial results. And so, the company was resourced, with, people that were able to, sort of to bring that level of creativity to the forefront. So yeah, exciting projects. We're going to companies like Chanel, taking that product out of their freestanding stores, deconstructing it within a multi-branded concept, creating some degree of, local accessibility. Projects that we worked on, which were terribly rewarding. One of them was called Crafted, which was all around the idea of perfectly imperfect. So going back to something that Leena mentioned earlier, being responsible for the ongoing existence of craft. So Leena, one of those projects, we work with the Gem Palace family in Jaipur, and they wove for us in silver an incredible evening clutch, right? We worked with a bootmaker in Florence to craft the perfect riding boot. I think more and more people are looking for a very personal experience in terms of the products that they surround themselves with. I think art is the penultimate example of that personal experience. But I think, right through the sort of the hierarchy of consumer purchases, I think there's a genuine interest and need for people to work, or for people to have product that is handcrafted. so the company was very generous in terms of allocating resources to working with good photographers, to working with great printmakers. So it was really just a kind of a part of, you know, a kind of a part of the company culture, and it was really very much our DNA in terms of how we would visually present our stores, how we would speak to our customers, and you know, and the things that we would actually put in those stores. You know, I think that's a consumer trend, and I think that's becoming more and more important.
And
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about the collaborations that you're now working on in Sri Lanka. You shared a few projects with me over the last few days that are really, really
Yes, I mean I've only been traveling to Sri Lanka since 2004 as a sort of very regular visitor, let's say a tourist. In 2021, you know, I began the restoration of this 300-year-old house. So first, certainly that experience for 2 years of working with local, and I would call them craftspeople, was really interesting. In Sri Lanka, often you have very little to work with. So people are extremely resourceful and extremely good at problem solving. So it was a really interesting journey for me in terms of how people work and think. Nothing is discarded. Everything is used again. You know, repurposing is not a trend, you know, a kind of a trend word here. So that whole process of you know, working on the house was you know, extremely interesting. That has sort of driven me to work on 2 projects. One of them is I'm working on a project called 10 by 10, which is a very small collaboration with 10 different people on 10 developed items. So things that I think are interesting and could appeal to people outside of Sri Lanka. So it's a very kind of simple process. It's very organic. I would like to think that we would have it completed by Christmas, but you can't really put a time frame on creativity. And the other project that I've been working on is working with a gentleman called Theseus Chan, who's a printmaker from Singapore, a very renowned printmaker. He works for people like Comme des Garçons, et cetera, et cetera. And working with Theseus, another Japanese printmaker, and a Sri Lankan creative on a publishing exercise. So, which is again a juxtaposition of 3 people's, you know, encounters or takeaways from Sri Lanka. We've had 2 workshops at the house. It's the first time that those people have come to Sri Lanka, and it's been very interesting to observe what speaks to them, you know, in everyday life. So they're the sort of the two projects I'm currently working on.
I think it's so interesting how you both have touched on this conversation on art and craft and design. And I think it's really to be noted that these different industries are so intertwined. And as a patron, you both play this very important role in highlighting that as well, and inspiring collaborations that can happen between, which are also incredibly important in the development of the ecosystem. I'm going to jump right into the Q&A because we have a couple of really interesting questions.
Sure.
We have Mariam with us who's asking you both, what did you learn through your roles as patrons about the art infrastructure in Sri Lanka, and how do you envision it growing?
So
Leena first.
Sure. Okay, so I mean, it's come a long way. It really has. I mean, there's a lot more available. I think artists are using better quality products. I mean, I've had issues. I remember buying art in the early 90s, and I've had to ask the artists, to come back and help because, the actual canvas and paints were not great, so I'm just technicalities. So you get, I think, far superior work also sometimes now with just what's available. And I think there are a lot more talks. There's a lot more out there. Social media is a big thing now. I mean, that wasn't there before. I mean, I think it's not just about buying something. You can be a supporter, patron also. You just by just showing up. Go to an art talk. There's something on. Just go visit. The artists just need to see people come to appreciate their work. It's not just about translating everything into sales. That happens. But that's how I think the infrastructure has grown. There's more awareness. And I think there are also workshops with the public. I remember doing a great one with an artist. There's a lot more out there. I think you just have to keep your ears and eyes open for it. And there's so much learning in the process. And really, I mean, you would know that, Saskia, and so would your dad and everyone else in the art world. I mean, it's evolved to such a sophisticated level now. The artists have become braver, and they're all deep diving now.
Peter, would you like to give your take on that question?
Yes, I would agree with Leena in that the artists are certainly in the period of time that I've been observing art, the young artists are very brave, and they're quite borderless in terms of the sort of topics that they're working on, and on the social commentary of their work, which I think is extremely interesting. Particularly, living in Sri Lanka during COVID, I lived through the crisis, etc. You really start to understand the context of the subject within the kind of the space that you're living in. I also agree with Leena that there is an abundance of art happenings. And quite often, someone will ring me and say, "Did you see this?" And I said, "Well, sorry, I had no idea that was happening." And when you talk about art, you talk about architecture, etc., etc. So I think there's an awful lot that's happening consistently, and there seems to be a lot of people that are following it and being a part of it.
So you've both spoken about the role of artists. How are patrons playing a role in shaping the cultural conversation around art and also in shaping public perception?
I think there's so much more awareness and involvement and interest. Just interest, even with general public. I mean, you didn't have to be an art lover to now suddenly, just appreciate all this. I think because it's out there, everyone is being drawn into it. I'm seeing that, from all walks of life. The MMCA has been great also. Their footfall is great. It's not just all the galleries, actually. It's not intimidating anymore. I mean, anyone can walk in. The GD has also done a great job. We've, of course, done a fantastic job. Barefoot, gallery, the gallery. So I think it's great. I think for me, that's what's really important and all visitors actually do come. I mean, for me, I also gift Sri Lankan art now. I mean, that's also another little role you can play. For me now, when I give gifts overseas or even locally, I try and give art if I know someone would appreciate it. And it goes a long way. And then they come back as return buyers, and there's more awareness. So now when I have people coming to say, what are the art galleries in town? And I have a list. I send them to please visit them, rather than just give us the shops. So now I can see that paradigm shift in people's minds also. And I think people are just a lot more interested in talks and, just learning. I think it's learning, isn't it, Peter? I mean, everyone's unlearning, learn, unlearn, learn, that whole cycle.
Yes, and I would just, Saskia, make one comment, and I would support Leena in that whenever I attend anything, it seems there's a very democratic feel. Yes. It's quite ageless. There's a lot of young people. I'm always quite taken by the diversity of people at a gallery event or a concert, or so there is that genuine interest, I think, which makes it feel very vital.
And the final question from Indira: how do you see the role of Sri Lankan art in preserving cultural identity while also engaging with global artistic trends? And in what ways can local artists balance these influences to create a unique voice in the international art scene?
See, I think now art patronage, or whether you want to call it patronage or collecting or just appreciating or, coming to just experience it, is more important than ever, especially in today's world, natural disasters, wars, strife, in a world of, technology, mass culture. So I think it's all the more reason people are gravitating towards this. Because there's also, I think there's a lacuna in everyone, I think everyone wants to kind of go out there, appreciate, get moved, going to this, something that can help them think and also sometimes connect with their own emotions. So I think this is really very important. And that's why I see the success of this. And Sri Lankan artists, actually, I think this is a great time for them. They just need to go out there, understand, though, all aspects of art, like we spoke earlier, the business of art and what, technicalities, and keep their head down and do and reevaluate their work, step back, get the help of galleries, experts, like older people, work together, workshops, and people out there to support them. It's really up to them to keep it going. And to be brave, to continue to be brave, really.
And Peter, would you like to add something to that question?
Yeah, probably just to sort of depart a little bit from what Leena just spoke of, but just to say that I think one of the challenges that Sri Lankan artists have had, is the fact that their work has been perhaps isolated from,
yes,
the art community, the international art community. So, this role of collecting, being a patron, is extremely important for those people that are working with that goal in mind. And I think it also becomes very important that everyone that visits Sri Lanka, needs to be signposted towards the kind of wealth, that is offered, across the artistic spectrum. It's probably something, Leena, that is not promoted by the Sri Lankan Tourism Board, correct? Or
no, I was resisting saying that, but even the whole design aesthetic of Sri Lanka, there was a campaign around that, art, design, aesthetic, because that's, I got a call the other day also from someone saying, we want to come to Sri Lanka, but this is what we want to do. So I have all these things on my phone to people to come and, go there, go here, do this. And then they kind of appreciate it. And that's how the whole love story with Sri Lankan art and the aesthetic starts.
Yes. It's quite interesting for me, the number of architects, designers, landscape artists that choose to come to Sri Lanka,
yes,
to actually just follow the sort of wealth of work or the incredible examples that exist. But unless you're actually tapped in to someone that can take you to those places, it's really, really hard to find.
Very hard. And I think, it's also important, Saskia, like what you do is great with Freeze. You have to go out internationally. I know it's an expensive business. I know it's not easy, but, maybe auction houses also, maybe I would love to see more living Sri Lankan artists being, auctioned or represented or just by galleries overseas or just shows overseas, because that's the only way. And it's surprising, especially in India. That's such a huge market to tap, and people are really interested, and people are really, investing in art, enjoying art. Yeah.
And
It's
yes,
a whole-
and I do think, Leena, that you know, people that I take to a gallery or to see something are always quite surprised by the quality of the subject
Yeah,
and the quality of the
absolutely.
work, you know.
Absolutely.
And they're also quite surprised when they read a little bit further or speak to people a little bit further about, this legacy of art has existed
Yes.
for, since the 40s, very modern work was being produced in those decades. But unfortunately, without a national gallery, there is no central place to take people where they can actually experience.
Very frustrating. It is.
Because there's really not one deposit of that archive.
And that's a big reason behind why we started these art talks as well, is the fact that there is less information out there about the Sri Lankan contemporary scene and our art history. So a lot of people assume it to be a more recent development, but throughout the war, Sri Lanka was a very contemporary art scene, just underrepresented. So,
I mean, Saskia, I attended with you during Kala last year in Colombo, the lunch at the with the George Keyt pieces. I mean, spectacular. In composition and size and subject, all hanging in this one boardroom, right?
Yeah, yes, we did that. I'm
and
glad
they absolutely. Sorry.
And I'm glad you enjoyed that. It's true.
Yes.
People need to see this work.
Yes, because it puts, I think, what is being produced now into a very interesting context. It gives what's being produced now, I think, a sense of provenance, a sense of legitimacy, a sense of time. I bought my first Ivan Paris a couple of years ago, and I think it sits so well with other pieces I have in the house,
Yes, so this is it. I'm glad you brought this up, because don't you find, Peter, with Sri Lankan modern or contemporary art, it just goes. It just goes with the home. It goes with pieces you have, and I have that issue with I have been to lots of contemporary art shows in India and in other countries, and I struggle to find something that kind of works with what I have or in my home. But if I go into a Sri Lankan art show, I can find something. Sometimes I resist and not buy, because sometimes your collection, it has to be quality, not just quantity.
Yes.
That, but it just goes. You're right. There's something very universal about Sri Lankan contemporary art.
Yes, but I'm sure a lot of that very good art, Leena, that we don't see is in private homes, correct? Or it's in board trusts, or it's not readily available, correct, for the general public to see, or a visitor to actually see.
But that's with every country, right?
Yeah, to a degree.
To a degree.
Yes.
No, but Saskia, would you say the quality of art and what's coming out now is very high and up to standard, and it's a great reflection on what the artists are really doing and what they're trying to say?
I think it's been consistently so.
Yes.
I think the difference is that there's more representation now, and we have institutions working and foundations working.
Yes.
And patrons such as yourself fully engaged in recognizing what has happened here, collecting across modern and contemporary, and celebrating that. And see speaks for itself. I mean, this is so incredibly important. And these conversations go a long way in informing people on what is really happening here. It's what we need to do until we have our national art galleries and our open spaces where people can really come and engage. And teaching, for example, is incredibly important. But I have to thank you both across two completely opposite time zones joining us today and sharing so much about your story of how you came to collecting and engaging with art and design and craft. It's been so wonderful speaking to you both. And I hope everyone has enjoyed. Thank you for engaging with your conversation.
Thank you.
And we'll be recording this conversation. As I mentioned, it has been recorded and we will be sharing it on our website. So please do share it across to your communities as well. Thank you both and see you soon.
Thank you, Saskia. We really enjoyed it. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Leena. I hope the sun shines in London in the next days. So.
Well.